There's a house in rural Texas right now on the market that costs less than a used car, $19,000. Not a deposit, not a down payment, the whole thing. A house with a roof and a porch and a yard for $19,000. And the first thing you feel when you see it is a little jolt of hope. No mortgage, no landlord, no rent ever again. Just buy it outright and walk in the door. That's the dream. Let's talk about why it's this cheap. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about a $19,000 house. That price is not a bargain. It's a message. Every house has a price, and the price is the market quietly telling you the truth about a place. When a house costs $800,000, the market is saying everybody wants to be here. When a house costs $19,000, the market is saying something too. You just have to be willing to hear it. And most people don't want to hear it because the number is so tempting. $19,000 is real money, but it's gettable money. It's a car. It's a good year of savings. It feels, for the first time in your adult life, like a house might actually be within reach. So people see that number and they stop asking questions. This whole video is the question they skipped. Here's the idea I want you to hold on to for the next 15 minutes, because everything comes back to it. When you buy a house, you are not really buying a building. You are buying a location's future. The building is just the thing sitting on top of the future. And a $19,000 house is cheap for exactly one reason. The market has looked at that location's future and decided there isn't much of one. So let's start with what $19,000 actually buys you. Solid bones sometimes, but almost always it needs everything. A roof that's near the end of its life. Wiring from a different era. Plumbing you'll be lucky to trust. The price got low for a reason, and part of that reason is standing right there in the house. But the condition of the house is the small problem. It's the obvious problem, the one you can see in the photos. The real reasons these houses cost $19,000 have almost nothing to do with the house itself, and everything to do with the dot on the map where it's standing. So let's leave the building for a minute and look at the ground underneath it. These houses cluster in very specific places, small towns in the Texas Panhandle, the kind that were built around one thing: a rail line, a factory, an oil field, a single employer that gave the town a reason to exist, and then, somewhere in the last 40 years, that one thing closed. The rail line moved, the factory shut, the jobs left, and a town without a reason to exist starts, very slowly, to empty out. Now here's the first reframe, and it's the one that catches everyone. You think the price of the house is the cost of the house. It isn't. The price is the cheapest part of the whole thing, because a house that needs everything needs to be paid for twice. Once when you buy it, and again when you make it livable. And that second bill doesn't care at all what you paid for the first one. Put a new roof on that house, and you're looking at somewhere between $8,000 and $15,000. Rewire it, another $8,000 to $15,000. Fix the plumbing, replace the heating and cooling, deal with whatever 40 years of neglect left behind, and it is genuinely normal to spend more fixing a $19,000 house than you spent buying it. You didn't buy a home, you bought a very large, very expensive project. And you cannot skip it. This isn't a nicer kitchen you're choosing to want. A house without a working roof, safe wiring, and running water isn't a cheap house. It's a shed you're not allowed to sleep in. The renovation isn't optional the way people tell themselves it is. It's the difference between owning a home and owning a liability with a front door. Say you get through all that, you buy it, you fix it, you're standing in a livable house you now own outright. No mortgage. This is the part of the dream that's actually real, and it's worth being honest about. But owning a house free and clear does not mean the house is free. Because there is a whole set of costs that arrive every single year, and not one of them cares what you paid at the start. Property tax comes first, and Texas has some of the highest property taxes in the country. But here's the twist. Your tax isn't based on what you paid, it's based on what the county says the house is worth after you fix it up. So you buy a house for $19,000, you spend $40,000 making it nice, and the county turns around and taxes you on a $60,000 house. The better you make it, the more you owe. Then insurance, and this is where it gets genuinely hard. Insurers look at a rural house, far from the nearest fire station, in an area prone to hail, wind, sometimes wildfire, and they do one of two things. They quote you a premium that feels insane for a house this cheap, or they refuse to cover it at all. And a house you can't insure is a house you can't get a normal loan on, which means the next buyer has to pay cash too. Hold that thought. It matters later. Then the running costs the distance creates. You're on a well, so when the pump dies, that's yours, a few $1,000s. You're on a septic tank, so when it fails, that's yours too. Heating a poorly insulated old house through a Texas Panhandle winter is not cheap. And every single trip, to work, to a doctor, to a grocery store that might be 40 minutes away, burns fuel and time you didn't spend when you lived in town. So let's step back and ask the real question. Why is it actually this cheap? Not the roof, not the wiring, the deep reason. And the deep reason is the one thing you cannot renovate. There are no jobs. The employer that built the town is gone and nothing replaced it. The population is older every year because the young people already left, and a house is only worth what the next person will pay for it. In a town people are leaving, that number keeps falling. This is the part that turns a cheap house into a trap, so I want to slow down here. When you buy in a growing city, your house is what people call liquid. If you need to leave, you sell, maybe even for a profit, and you move on. Your money isn't stuck. It's parked in something you can turn back into cash whenever you need to. That flexibility is invisible, and it's worth an enormous amount, and you only notice it when it's gone. In a dying town, your house is the opposite. It is the least liquid thing you will ever own. Think about who the next buyer even is. The town is emptying out. Almost nobody is moving in. The few who might can't get insurance or a loan, so they'd need cash, just like you did. You are trying to sell to a market of almost no one. Read that again because it's the whole game. You are trying to sell to a market of almost no one. So here is the reframe that changes everything. The problem was never that the house is cheap to buy. The problem is that it will be almost impossible to sell. You didn't get a discount, you bought the one asset in America that can quietly trap the money you put into it. Every dollar you spend fixing that house is a dollar you may never see again because there is no one to sell it back to. And this is exactly why the price is $19,000 and not $90,000. The market isn't being generous. The market is pricing in the fact that whoever buys this is going to struggle to ever get out. The low price isn't a gift to you. It's the compensation the market is offering a person for taking on a place with no exit. You're not being rewarded. You're being paid a little to accept a big risk. Let me show you what that actually does to the math, because this is the number that should stop you. Two houses. One is your $19,000 house in a town that's emptying out. The other is a $300,000 house in a small city that's slowly growing. Everyone assumes the cheap one is the smart money. Watch what happens over 10 years. The cheap house, $19,000 to buy, $40,000 to fix, so about $60,000 in. Property tax and insurance and repairs on an old rural house, call it $5,000 a year, another $50,000 over the decade. And at the end, the town has fewer people than when you arrived, so the house is worth less than you put in. Maybe you sell for $40,000, maybe you can't sell at all. You put in over $100,000 and you cannot get it back. The $300,000 house looks scarier on day one, but it's in a place people are moving to. It's insurable, so you could finance it instead of draining your savings. Its value tends to rise with the town instead of falling with it. And when you want to leave, there is a line of buyers because people actually want to be there. It costs more every month. It costs dramatically less to be stuck in. That is the whole difference. So the $19,000 house can genuinely end up costing you more than the $300,000 one. Not on the price tag, on the total, because the real cost of a house was never the number on the listing. It's the tax, the insurance, the repairs, and above all, whether you can ever turn it back into money. On every one of those, the cheap house quietly loses. Now, I want to be fair because this is not a video about how cheap houses are always a scam. They're not. There are people for whom a $19,000 house is a genuinely smart move, and it's worth knowing if you're one of them because the math flips completely depending on why you're buying. If you're buying it purely for the land and the house is almost irrelevant, the math can work. Land doesn't need a roof. If you want a cheap hunting cabin, a weekend place, somewhere you never need to sell because you never counted that money as savings in the first place, it can work. The trap isn't the house. The trap is treating a place you can't leave as if it's an investment you can. It can also work if you genuinely never plan to leave. If you're retiring, you have income from somewhere else, you love the quiet, and you have made real peace with the distance and the isolation, then the thing that makes it a trap, the fact that you can't sell, stops mattering. You can't be trapped somewhere you never wanted to leave. For that person, the low price really is just a low price. The people it destroys are the ones who buy it as a step up. The young couple who thinks this is how they finally escape rent and build wealth. They pour their savings and their weekends into it, and then life moves. A job, a baby, a family emergency, and they need to leave. And they discover the house won't let them. Their money is in the walls, and the walls are in a town nobody's buying into. That's the story that actually plays out. And it plays out at real addresses. There are whole towns across rural America, not just Texas, where homes sell for the price of a used car, and some where local governments will practically give you a house to get someone, anyone, to move in and pay taxes. When a town is handing out houses, that is not an opportunity. That is the clearest signal a market can possibly send about where that place is heading. Because a house given away for $1 isn't a lottery win, it's a town telling you, as honestly as a market can speak, that it cannot find a single person willing to pay real money to live there. The gift is the warning. And the same logic, in a gentler form, is exactly what's happening at $19,000. It's cheap because staying is a bet, and leaving is nearly impossible. So what do you actually do with all of this, if a cheap house still tempts you? First, understand what you're really buying. You are not buying a discount. You are buying a location's future, and the price is the market's honest opinion of that future. $19,000 is not the market being kind, it's the market being blunt. Second, separate the two questions people always blur together. How much does it cost to buy is one question. How much does it cost to own, and can I ever get out, is a completely different one, and it's the one that actually decides whether this ruins you. A cheap house with expensive ownership and no exit is not a cheap house, it just has a cheap price. Third, look at the ground before you look at the building. Is anyone moving to this town, or is everyone leaving? Is there more than one reason for it to exist, or did it all rest on the one thing that already closed? Can you get insurance? Can the next buyer get a loan? Those questions tell you more about the true cost of that house than any photo of the kitchen ever will. And here's the honest, uncomfortable truth underneath all of it. The reason a house in a good city costs so much is the same reason a house in a dying town costs so little. It's not really the buildings. Both of them are just wood and wire and pipe. What you're paying for, or not paying for, is the future of the place around it. In one, the future is crowded. In the other, it's empty. None of this means never buy a cheap house. It means never buy the price, buy the place, buy the honest answer to whether anyone will want to be here in 20 years, because that answer is what you're actually paying for, whether the listing says $19,000 or $900,000. The number on the sign is just the market whispering what it already knows. So when you see that house, the one that costs less than a used car, and you feel that jolt of hope, that no mortgage, no landlord, finally free feeling, take a breath before the feeling spends your savings for you. That feeling is real. The dream of owning something outright is real. But the price that triggered it is not a gift, it's a sentence, and it's worth reading to the end. Because the cruelest version of this story isn't the person who looks at the $19,000 house and walks away. It's the person who buys it, fixes it, loves it, and then one day needs to leave, and finds out the hard way that the cheapest house they ever bought was the most expensive one to own, and the only one they could never get out of. The price of a house is what you pay to get in. The cost of a house is everything after that, and whether you can ever get back out. Those are two completely different numbers, and the whole trap of the cheap house is that the first one is small enough to make you forget the second one entirely. $19,000 is a real house. That part is true, but it is not a shortcut, and it is not an escape. And for most of the people it tempts, it is not cheap at all. It just looks cheap on the one day you're deciding to buy it, which happens to be the only day the low price ever works in your favor. So, a house for less than a used car. On the listing, the deal of a lifetime. On the map, a place people are leaving. And in the math, one of the few things you can buy that can quietly cost you more the less you paid for it. The price was never the cost, it never is. It's just the only number small enough to make you stop asking what the real one is.